Federal judicial selection. We know that the Constitution allows the President to select federal judges with the advice and consent of the Senate. But what does that mean in practice? Over time, this process has developed into a somewhat complicated dance between the President, the Senate, the nominee, and the public. Let's take a look at how this works. The first step is for the President to wait for a spot on the bench to open up. The most common source of a new seat is the death, retirement, or resignation of a member of one of the federal courts. Sometimes this is because a judge gets appointed to a higher court. Rarely, this is because a judge is impeached. But Congress might also authorize additional seats on an existing court. It could also create a new court altogether. Finally, this process starts all over again if a previous judicial nomination fails. There are more judicial vacancies than you might think. Obviously, we know that the late Justice Scalia's seat was vacant for quite a while after his sudden death. But did you know how many federal circuit and district court judgeships are vacant? The next step in the process is for the President to pick a nominee. For this, the President typically relies heavily on his advisors. They must screen potential nominees for any embarrassing skeletons in the closet, since they are bound to come to light farther along in the process. At this point, the President used to send the names to the American Bar Association's Standing Committee on the Federal Judiciary. This committee provides a rating of the potential nominees. The ratings are well qualified, qualified, and not qualified. Conservative presidents have objected to this process, mostly because the ABA has a tendency toward a leftward bias. In fact, President Bush abandoned this step in the process, and the ABA committee had to wait until the name was announced publicly in order to conduct its ratings. President Obama reinstated the ABA's preferred role earlier in the process, but unfortunately for him, he was rewarded with a high number of not qualified ratings for his judicial nominees. President Trump indicated early in his term that he will not alert the ABA about his nominees ahead of time. The process is a little different for district court judges. Remember that federal judicial districts do not cross state boundaries, so each district is completely within a single state. There is a tradition of senatorial courtesy in which the President consults with the senators of the state in which the vacancy has occurred. Of course, the tradition only really applies to senators who are of the same political party as the President. But some senators find clever ways around this. Indeed, by most reports, this is the way that Governor Sandoval got his seat on the federal district court bench in 2005. Senator Reid, a Democrat, recommended Sandoval, a Republican, to President Bush for appointment. Now, whether this was an act of true bipartisanship or if it had more to do with trying to sideline the political career of a formidable rival, I'll leave that to others to speculate. As you probably know, Sandoval resigned from his judgeship in 2009 in order to run for governor of Nevada against Harry Reid's son, Rory. Interestingly, though, the elder Reid has recently endorsed the idea of Sandoval being appointed to the Supreme Court. In any event, the power of the home state senator has probably diminished over time. President Carter insisted that senators set up nominating commissions to provide recommendations. This did not go over terribly well, and subsequent presidents have abandoned this demand. Presidents do still tend to check with the senators of the home state for district court appointments, regardless whether they are of the same party as the president. This is because of the blue slip rule in the Senate that we'll talk about in a little bit. The last part of this step is the FBI background check. All nominees go through this process. The results of this background check help to ensure that there will be no surprises that could come back to bite the president during the confirmation process. Assuming that everything goes according to plan, the president announces the name of the nominee publicly. Under Presidents Bush II and Trump, this is when the ABA Standing Committee on the Federal Judiciary learns about the nomination and conducts its review of the nominee's qualifications. The senators learn of the nomination at this stage as well. Home state senators are asked to fill out what is called a blue slip. This blue slip, like the one you see here, simply asks the senator whether he or she approves of the proposed nomination. If a senator fails to return a blue slip, the process goes on hold. At this point in the process, the nominee also gets a questionnaire to fill out. This questionnaire is quite long and requires the nominee to submit detailed financial records, among other things. If all of the blue slips get turned in, the process moves to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Members of the committee review the nominee's record in detail. At this point, it has become increasingly common for the public and interest groups to become involved, especially when the nominee is for the Supreme Court. The committee then holds hearings about the nominee's record. Well, maybe they do. Sometimes the nominations stall here, especially when a member of the Senate places a hold on the nomination. Often, this is done by a senator from the judge's home state. In fact, Senator Heller put a hold on Harry Reid's pick for a nomination to the federal district court. He accomplished this by failing to turn in his blue slip. More than a dozen of President Obama's nomination failed at this stage as a result of unreturned blue slips. The blue slip threat kept President Obama from even trying to fill the judgeships in Texas. However, once the Republicans gained control of Congress and the presidency in early 2017, there was almost immediately talk about abolishing the blue slip practice. This, of course, would give the president much more power to select nominees that the home state senators do not support. So, if the nominee does get a chance to have a committee hearing, the process moves forward. It is largely a question and answer period where the senators ask questions directed to the nominee, or to the C-SPAN audience maybe, and the nominees do their best to avoid saying anything too controversial. Sometimes, the process can be a little less than enjoyable for the nominee. The photo at the top right is from Justice Alito's confirmation hearing. You can see his wife in the background. At the bottom is a picture of Clarence Thomas with his wife behind him during his confirmation hearing. This was probably taken right about the time that Joe Biden was yelling at him. There's an HBO movie about this now called Confirmation. Yep, sometimes it gets pretty ugly. But some appointees seem to have a blast during their confirmation hearings. In any event, confirmation hearings for Supreme Court justices can often be very interesting to watch. Thanks, C-SPAN. After the hearing, senators have a week in which to submit follow-up questions to the nominee, who then submits written responses. Next, the Judiciary Committee votes to send the nomination to the floor of the Senate for consideration. When the nomination gets to the Senate, it can come with or without a recommendation. The full Senate will then conduct its own debate and hearings. It used to be that the threat of a filibuster at this stage could shut the nomination down. But Republicans did away with the filibuster for Supreme Court nominees in early 2017, just in time to avoid the inevitable filibuster of the Neil Gorsuch confirmation. So, at this stage, the full Senate will vote on the nomination. A bare majority will take the day. The last step, if a nominee makes it this far, is the swearing-in ceremony. First, the president signs the new justice's oath. Next, they hold a swell little ceremony. Here, the judge takes an oath. Well, it's actually 2 oaths. They promise to administer justice fairly, and they also promise to defend the Constitution against all enemies. After this, some newly sworn-in justices get a little one-on-one time with the president. Then, it's off to get measured for a cool new robe.